welcome everyone to today's Let's Talk Performance on AI in Government. My name is Stephanie Bentadoon. I am NCPP's Associate Director. Tell you a little bit about NCPP. We strive to improve performance in public and nonprofit organizations through research, education, consulting, and building a global network of professionals, practitioners, and scholars in the public sector. Today, I am thrilled to introduce our very special expert guests. First, I'll introduce our co-moderator, Arun Manoharan, NCPP Director and Associate Professor at Sawyer Business School, Suffolk University. Our other co-moderator, Georgette Dumont, the MPA Director at the University of North Florida, and Alan Shark, the author of Artificial Intelligence, a primer for state and local government. So we'll just kick it off with some introductions. Arun, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Let's Talk Performance webinar. My name is Arun Manoharan. I'm the Director for the National Center for Public Performance. I'm an Associate Professor at the Sawyer Business School. My areas of research are digital government and public management. I also look at strategic planning and communication. And the goal of my research is to see how to make technology improve the performance of government. And now we are in this era of AI, smart technologies. So I think it is important that we have these conversations where we focus on specifically on the state and local governments. There's a lot talked about AI in federal government and businesses, but then we need to start looking at the local and the state governments, which is the point where most citizens interact with government. So yes, thank you again. I'd like to welcome the guests for joining us.
Thank you, Arun. My name is Georgette Dumont. I am the MPA Director at the University of North Florida and an Associate Professor. My research areas are in digital governance with public and nonprofit organizations. My focus is really on citizen engagement and how governments and nonprofits can use these technical tools to be able to better engage their stakeholders. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Alan Shark, and I wear a couple of hats. I am Associate Professor at the Schar School at George Mason University. I also am the Executive Director of the Public Technology Institute, a nonprofit serving local governments across the country and to some extent internationally. And I'm also very much involved as a co-chair of the National Academy of Public Administration's leadership panel, tech leadership panel. My area is really governance and technology leadership. It's one thing to have tech, but it's all about how do we manage this stuff? How do we lead? And that raises all sorts of interesting issues that I'm sure we're going to get to today.
Excellent. So I am going to start questioning you. So we talk about, and you, me, and Arun all noted that we study stuff with digital government, and it has changed over time. It used to be e-government, and this is when you could have a website and an email, and you were considered, wow, a rock star. And it went from e-government to e-governance, and they're all models on deciding how, like all of the different components. And then it's kind of switched over into digital governance. Where does AI fit into all of those structures?
Well, that could be the whole webinar right now in terms of how we have progressed, although most of the world still refers to e-government as it, and only in the US are we starting to really talk about digital government. Where AI comes in is this whole idea of how do we develop better process improvement. I mean, aside from all the sexy, shiny things that we hear with AI, it's really about process improvement. How can we do a better job in serving our mission and our citizens? They're not always the same. And so we have to look at what are the latest tools. So 3 years ago, many of us were talking about emerging tech, and we were talking about blockchain, we were talking about database management, and then all of a sudden, it almost seemed like it came from nowhere. Artificial intelligence. And I think what gave it its prominence was this explosion of generative AI manifesting through ChatGPT. That was like a game changer. The take rate take rate on that was phenomenal. It took like 5 days to reach 1 million users, where Netflix to reach 1 million users took 5 years. So it just shows you that there might have been a hunger, and this seems to be fitting a need. Now, hopefully, in the course of this discussion, we'll talk about what are those applications. But generally speaking, it's a new tool set that we can use in two ways. Professionally, as in how do we make ourselves as individuals more productive? There's a whole list of things that we can talk about there. And then enterprise-wise, what are the applications that we can use that can provide better services that tie in the various units of government?
Alan, each one of those, we could it could be its own little webinar. So Arun, you might want to just book us up for the year. And we
Yes.
can actually get covered everything that we need to get covered. So I've read your book, Alan, and I liked it. I like your co-author. I like how you just put it right up front. I'm using AI as my co-author, and that kind of AI was the generative AI, and you had a conversation with AI. So can you tell us a little bit more about your book and why somebody who is engaged with local and state government should read it?
Well, I hope they want to read it. It was written because I kept getting all these questions. I've always been in the forefront wherever I can be to look at what is the latest and greatest emerging tech. Early on, I concluded that AI was more than just a fad. AI is something far more phenomenal. And I think the impact of AI generically is about the same impact as what we experienced when the internet became public. I think it's that profound. I used to think cloud computing was the big game changer, and certainly was, but AI was something far more. People started writing to me, asking me questions. I started writing about it. I started doing research on it. I probably have done a dozen articles for various magazines on the topic. And then finally, it made sense, since I was getting all these questions, to just put it in one place and make it readily available. And so the challenge was, do I take a classical professor approach, or do I try something new and actually use the very tools that are available to every one of us? And that's kind of what I did. And as you alluded to, Georgette, yeah, I give full credit to a handful of my new best friends that are generative AI. Plus, I had the cover design through AI for the most part, and I had, I think, some 36 kind of illustrations to break up the text using AI. I used AI to do all the grammar stuff. I used AI for formatting. So when you think about it, this is a very much an AI generated book. Now, I have to say that when I talked to my dean about this, he was not as impressed as I had thought. He said, well, when I heard about it, I said, this is great. Where was it published? And I told him, well, it was published by the Public Technology Institute, a little known 501c3. Suddenly his interest and jaw dropped like, oh, well, that's nice. So, this isn't your typical academic peer-reviewed research, but it is a good primer that if anyone is curious about what's going on from a historical standpoint, right up to where we see things perhaps transpiring the next 5 or 6 years, I've taken a leap forward in saying, this is where I think we're going to be. And so far, this is tracked to be pretty much on target. The subtitle of this book is Everything You Need to Know Since Yesterday. That was my way of hedging my bet to say things are changing every day. I spend 20 to 30 minutes almost every day looking at new releases of different kinds of software and different kind of applications. And I have to be honest, there's nothing that would make me change what I've thus far written. So the book is kind of foundational, is the way I would put it. Will there be an update maybe a year from now? But the foundational elements are there in terms of governance, usage, applications, and future and real concerns.
So I like how you say how you used AI for your book on AI. How are governments using AI? Are they being innovative? And I know that Arun talked about the conversation tends to be more at the federal level, but what about state and local governments? How can they, or how are they using AI for their own process improvements?
So I was at a meeting not too long ago, and a lot of people came because AI was the headline. And they kind of, at the lunch break and at the end, said, I'm not seeing very many applications. And they were somewhat disappointed. And then I started talking to them. I said, well, how many are using AI at home? how many are using this or this, all these different applications? So on one hand, I think professionally, people are using it and they're not even associating it necessarily that it is AI powered, but they are using it in droves. And the more I talk about it, the more people say, oh, I didn't know it could do that. On the other hand, the question of actual implementation is a little different. People are being very, very skittish. Many are holding back. I know at the state level, it's all about policies, all about establishing guardrails, and putting the brakes on, because there is a fear that when you go into an enterprise type situation, or even as an individual, you could do a lot of unintentional harm. Case in point, somebody had a health spreadsheet and they wanted to see if AI could find the patterns and anomalies that was missing to the human eye. That would be a perfectly logical thing to do. Unfortunately, this person failed to strip out personally identifiable information. So once you put something in, you have no idea how it's going to be used, who else may use it, and that's where we have to be very careful. So step number one, don't ever put anything that's personally identifiable into a public or an open system. So yes, there are 3 states that have centers of excellence. You have a number of state CIOs who are largely taking the leadership role. In some cases, they're appointing people that work with them to kind of lead the effort under the CIO's office. And they're looking at the policies, the guidelines, and how to proceed. But there are things that are happening. For example, people are analyzing data in closed systems. So there are AI applications where you contract with the provider and you're saying, I don't want this system to touch anything outside of my domain. So in other words, if you're looking at data, it's only looking at data within your database. It's not spilling out to the general public. To the extent that we believe that is true, and I have reason to believe in most cases that is, then that's a really good use of looking for anomalies, looking for patterns, helping us jumpstart our thinking. The other way it's being used is in the evolution of chatbots. Now, chatbots used to be something that was mostly text-based. It's more and more moving towards voice as an option. And the voice response that I'm hearing is it's almost impossible to detect whether this is a robotic voice or a real voice. And that poses some interesting moral dilemmas or ethical dilemmas for the local government. My advice, if you are using such a verbal client, then I would say, hey, my name is Charlie. I am an automated bot. If at any time you wish to speak to a real human, press 1 or something like that. In other words, the public really needs to know who they're talking to. And there are a lot of little instances where governance and policies need to come in. This is where guardrails may be helpful, although I have a thought. I think guide rails are more important at the local level than guardrails. I have an article on that. And if you're interested, all the stuff that I've written, including more information on the book, you can just go to sharkbites.net when it's BYTES, one word, sharkbites.net. And my articles are there as a blog and the book information. But that's really what's just beginning to emerge. Some people are putting together policies, some people are putting in guidelines, and we could discuss that. They're somewhat different, but it is moving ahead.
Let's keep going with the whose responsibility is it to develop these guidelines and these structures? Is it the federal government, the state government, a nonprofit, a separate organization completely that's removed from all of it? Who in your view should be designing these policies and these rails, whether they be a guide or a guard? And do you think it's happening? And if it is it happening fast enough?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. The example that I use, and there are a couple of ways I want to answer it. Let's start, you mentioned the federal government. And the federal government has a different kind of challenge. They're not as close to the public as state and local governments are, but yet they play an incredibly important role. But in the president's last executive AI order that came out towards the end of the year, buried on page 57 was a requirement without any specification that every federal agency needs to have a chief artificial intelligence officer. Wow, who knew? And so the question then became, what does this person do and all that? I have an article where I wrote, this is what I think the person could do, and we shall see. Now, since then, OMB, Office of Management Budget, has come up with some guidance to the federal agencies. So the question is, what does that tell us for state and local government, which is coming back to your direct question? So my answer is, A, somebody should be in charge. B, I'm not sure it matters other than somebody who knows what they're doing. And it should either be a chief information officer, but it also could be your chief data officer or another related field. For example, one of the first localities in the United States, one of the first, but they all kind of came together at a very fast clip. In 2023, the city of Tempe, Arizona, came up with a policy, and their policy was unanimously approved by the city council. Now, the author and the one who led that effort was the chief data and geographic information officer. And she went to the Bloomberg folks, and she was looking around and took pieces here and there and put together something that is incredibly appealing, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, other localities, and there's probably about 30 or 40 in this country, that have followed suit, although they have modified it, and they'll call them guidelines. So I've had some interesting discussions. What's the difference? Well, many people think that guidelines should come first because this is such a nascent field that we don't want to be too punitive. This is why I like the idea of guardrails. I mean, guide rails, not guardrails. In other words, guidance, not thou shalt not, but guardrails, guide rails, difference. So in this case, we map out what people can do and where are the boundaries, what are the areas of personal responsibility, but they need to be flexible, hence guidelines. Now, the author of the policy said, well, our policy envisioned that we would have guidelines. So we have guideline governments that are putting together policies, and we have policy governments that are putting together guidelines. I guess you need both. One is like a preamble, thou shalt not, and all the great things that need to be said, guarding and protecting the public in terms of honesty and usage. And at the same time, the guidelines are the ones that come into play that talk about areas of responsibility, who's in charge. Now, while one person should coordinate it and lead it, I think every local government should form an AI applications group. I think they should meet and they should be interdisciplinary. This is the first technology that touches all the bases of everything that we do in government. I would say the same thing would be true in academia. In fact, I was at an event yesterday that we sponsored with NAPA, and it was brought out that the University of Albany is hiring a ton of new faculty. But instead of just bringing in a group of only AI experts, they're calling it A+, people who are in the various disciplines, perhaps humanities or whatever, but they're looking for an AI component to each of them to round out their knowledge and to be able to contribute to a wider discussion of how these things are used. So it is a very, I think it raises all sorts of interesting questions about governance as we knew it, because this is usually technology. Oh, that's a technology issue. No, this is an ethical issue. It's a philosophical issue. It touches on so many different things that we do.
So I'm active in local government here. And so I also know that local government's budgets are very stretched. And so if you're a local government, if you're a city manager or a CIO for a local government, you're thinking, how can I have all these resources? We can't hire a CDO or a chief artificial intelligence officer. How do you see local governments that are cash strapped being able to better utilize AI? And again, that kind of goes for process improvements. We're already using it for, spell check and things like that,
Right.
but more in the process improvements to make sure that government is running better.
Well, it raises two interesting issues, and I'll offer a possible solution. First, you mentioned resource challenge. I think the two things that come to mind is, can local governments even afford the services? And so these things that we are being asked to try and play with are free for the most part, just like Google Docs are free to us. If our governments use Google Docs, they're paying for it. And if we use these same applications enterprise-wide, we're paying for it. And if we as individuals want better service, we're going to be paying for it. So it's not going to be inexpensive. And my guess is we're in a period of seduction where we're being lured to try it and getting really sucked into all the great things it can do. And then you know what's going to happen. The prices are going to rise, and then we're going to have to make some decisions. So I'm worried that a number of local governments are not going to be able to take advantage of it because they can't afford the monthly subscriptions that are necessary. The second thing is you raise the question of talent. You know, they're understaffed to begin with. I think that more than 50%, if not 60% of local governments, from the very smallest to the largest, 50 to 60% have less than 5 people on their IT staff. In fact, I would say that at least 40% have a staff not exceeding 3. And there's an amazing number of people. It's a one-time operation. How can they possibly take advantage of it? So I think there are 2 things that are going to happen. Those who can afford it, the larger counties, the larger cities, are going to be paying for it, and they're going to help amortize the cost of all the developers. And as we see in many cases, as that happens, then suddenly the prices start to come down and become more affordable. Or they become better integrated in the things that we're already using. Look at Microsoft, for example. I'm a fan of Microsoft. I mean, it's a love-hate relationship over the years, but they do a reasonably good job. And now suddenly they're offering Copilot as part of their offering. It gets confusing with who gets the free one, there's different gradations. And like Microsoft, they screw it up by giving it all sorts of crazy names, and they change them, they change subscription rates. It's kind of hard. So the point being is, I think it'll become more commoditized over time, but in the immediate future, it's going to be very tough for local governments. So what do? Well, I think we need more regional approaches. We need to pool our resources together. And I've been saying this for a long time. We should be finding regional authorities, and if there is not one, create one. Now, in the past, I naively believed that some of the COGs, the Council of Governments that exist in many cities, that were formed to help harmonize transportation issues, have taken on a lot of other things. I think they are ripe to take on more responsibilities when it comes to technology, sharing expertise. Now, the state of Texas did something, and I don't think they're the only ones, but they did something really impressive where they realized that many smaller governments really needed help, mostly in cybersecurity, but they needed help. And that was not necessarily a state mandate, but they found a way to create some 25 plus regional areas. So they carved up the state and they identified one large force within each. It could be a technical college, a community college, it could be university, it could be something else, it could be the National Guard. And this way the group knew in that cluster who they could turn to for information, sharing resources, sharing personnel. I think we're going to have to look at how we manage governance when it comes to technology in ways we've never had to do before. The idea that everyone's going to have their own network, that everyone's going to have their own staff, is really counterproductive in terms of what we need today.
So what you're kind of getting at here is the future of, like, tomorrow's government is going to be very different than today's government on the business side of it. So how do we train public administrators, today's public administrators, to be able to flourish in tomorrow's environment?
Well, first, your very question implies that there will be change. I worry about that. The speed of government sometimes is frustrating, but in a more optimistic way, assuming that there's a willingness to change, I think we're going to have to revisit our MPA programs. I teach a course in technology and public management. I have a textbook by that very name. And when I was at Rutgers at the Newark campus, we had a very enlightened dean who had a required course. It was required. At George Mason, where I now teach, it's not required. It's just a little elective off on the side. I think every MPA program should have a technology course that talks about leadership and policies, not how to wire things, not necessarily how to operate them, but how to manage them. What are the trends? What are the tools that public administrators need? That's just one small part. A number of years ago, I did a study on how our professional certification for public managers looks at technology. So you have the CPM program, the Certified Public Management Program, which I believe is in every state. In most cases, it's operated by an anchor institution of higher learning. And my survey, which is probably 6 years old now, I looked at it and very few people were dealing with technology, especially AI. For some, it was like, oh yeah, we teach people how to use Excel and PowerPoint. So it was like those kind of presentation type tools or personal productivity, but they just didn't see a need to address technology. So we have to look at our institutions, even at the federal government end, the senior executive service. I looked at that, and technology is like an afterthought. It is a buried requirement left to each agency decide what it is they want to cover and when and how and the like. So this casual sense of we'll deal with technology or let the technology people take care of it is wrongheaded. And even the technology leaders acknowledge that they need more public support and they want to have more of a dialogue with more senior public managers. So we have a job to do at ASPA, at NAPA, at our universities to kind of relook at our curriculum. What is it that our students need to know today in today's dynamic environment to take a look at how do we manage, know what to ask and feel secure? That was the one thing that came out of my courses, that people came back and said, you know, I now feel, I don't feel I have a dumb question to ask anymore. And it's like, no, even the smartest of people I know sometimes are afraid to ask questions, but we have gaps in every one of us. All of us have gaps. We need to communicate and understand better. But with the new technologies like AI, this is an all hands approach. So the calling for an improved MPA program is going on forever. But with AI, I think it's much more urgent.
So we'd have to go back to the accrediting body to say, and there was discussion some time ago about adding technology to the core, but this is just kind of upping the.
Georgette, it's a bit of history, and you probably know this. NASPA did require it.
Yeah.
And it was like, what, 15 years ago? And that's where the course I was teaching, this is where the dean said, oh, we'll do this. And then they had a problem, I think. And the option was you either have a course like I was teaching at Rutgers, or you integrate technology through the rest of the curriculum. Those are your choices. The faculty balked. The faculty felt that they were ill-equipped and they couldn't find people that had the academic credentials to fill in the gaps. And so they suddenly changed everything to more of a self-certification kind of approach, and that was lost.
Yeah, and that was unfortunate. That was back in the e-government times.
Yeah,
and it's changed a lot. But so I'm going to let Arun take over in a second, but I want to just, what we're really talking about here is explaining the importance of adding a technology component to a lot of the stuff that we're already doing. It included in management. And that includes our local administrators, public administrators, understanding how to explain it to the local elected officials, the importance of investing in these technologies. Now, yes, it's going to cost a lot, but the reverse could be worse. But if you do it if you approach it as a risk assessment versus this is just a nice thing and we get a new shiny object, right. It makes it more understandable of the importance of some of these technologies, specifically when you start talking about cybersecurity. Do you want to talk a little bit about, explaining to elected officials why budgeting for technology is critical?
Yeah, in one of my chapters, I talk about education, and that's one area. Cybersecurity is probably the #1 concern of any technology manager, regardless, K through 12, higher education, anywhere, in the private sector as well. And they're overwhelmed with all the attacks that are coming at any given time. Even the smallest can be vulnerable, and perhaps even more vulnerable because they have the less capability to protect their own infrastructure. AI can fill in so many gaps, like mortar to bricks, where they can scour logs, look for anomalies, and I've identified 14 areas where AI can actually help in AI. I'm sorry, with cybersecurity. And one of those articles, that you don't have to get the book, it's on the website, you can see it, or the book. I talk about those 14 areas, and I was so happy. I said, oh, this is great. What because the list took a while to develop. And then I had a nightmare that I might be misleading people because there's another side to this that I hope we get to, and that is there are some real negatives to this too. So luckily, before that paper or article went to press, I came up with like 5 or 6 things we have to be very wary of. One of which is overdependence on technology. So there are things, and what happens if our wonderful sacred AI systems are hijacked by criminals or political actors? So there are a number of things we have to guard against, but generally speaking, there's an enormously important role for AI to play when it comes to cybersecurity protection. And if they're managed correctly, they can go a long way in better protecting, more so we can today, especially when we lack the training and we lack the staff and we don't have enough people 24/7. And most of the intrusions that cause the most harm occur on weekends. And that's when we're at the most vulnerable. Whatever institution we work at, we're not prepared to act as quickly as if we're all there, even if we're working remotely. It's not the same environment. So I would be telling elected officials, we need this to shore up our defenses. We need this to become more productive. We need this to better interface with our citizens, because citizens are frustrated and they're looking for us, government, to be as responsive as the private sector. In fact, we can do better. In fact, I think in many cases, 311 centers do far better than the private sector. Anybody ever try to call Amazon and get somebody, a human, in this country? Anybody try eBay? And these are situations where not so great, but airlines have gotten better, but they're using AI. So there are many ways to supplement current staff in terms of health emergencies, public emergencies, weather emergencies. In Oklahoma, we did an interview recently. There's a podcast that I do, and we interviewed the CIO from Ardmore, Oklahoma. And you can see that podcast, and it's really a good one. And he's talking about how he used AI for outbound dialing to alert people, saving lives. And they had three tornadoes in within a couple of hours of each other. Incredibly destructive. So AI is more than an insurance policy. It actually shows results in terms of citizen satisfaction, getting things done, being more efficient. And I'm being asked to speak, which is interesting. I have had some interesting speaking engagements. And one is to go to a little area in South Carolina, and there's a retreat of public managers to talk about future manpower requirements. And they think AI should be a major topic in this. Will we need as many people? Will we need different kind of people? I would say that when we look at AI as applied today in government, it is augmented intelligence. And therefore, it augments the processes we already have. I don't think people are going to lose their jobs, but there may be far less need to bring in new people because the individuals currently there are going to be more productive. They're going to be augmented. So in many cases, one can probably do an ROI saying, we do this right. We can maintain the level of staffing we have today without this need to keep increasing time over time. So there are some very interesting cost benefits to AI today.
I see a dear friend of mine, the mayor of Plantation, Florida, has had some comments on his city's experience with technology, and he did talk about the skittishness of the IT staff when things just couldn't quite be leveraged the way it was hoped to. Arun, would you like to summarize these?
Sure. Thank you, Georgette. Thank you, Alan. This is really excellent points that you bring in. Before we go to the comments, I just wanted to add on how when we teach our students too, right? We often say public administration is an art and science, and I think it is even more relevant when we teach AI to our students because it's not just technical. I think the whole e-government too has just been sold off as like a technical topic, and it's but there is so much beyond technical. I mean, we don't even have to deal with the technical aspects because there's a lot of decision making going on, especially for example when it comes to privacy, when it comes to ethics, right? There's an art to it. How do we judge what policies to bring in? So I think we have, the way we train them is not just giving them the technical the insights, but also training them to think, right? How do you bring in this culture? How do you transform this culture? So I think a lot depends on the public administration faculty and the students, because I tell my students in the e-government class, it's not, I mean, when you see all these innovations happening with AI and smart technologies, the first thing that should go into your mind is, how am I going to, don't want to say regulate, but how am I going to oversee, or, how do you bring in policies, right? What are the risks to this? How the public perception is so important. How do we communicate this to the public, to the IT employees? And actually, that question goes to the question in the chat, right? How do we communicate this to the citizens, right? The chat question is, they brought an AI expert to see if they can coach the residents or customers on the front end, but it was probably not as successful. So how do you communicate this? And so related question is the city government better off training existing IT staff, or simply bringing in an AI expert who is probably less versed on government protocols? So
I think it's a balance of both. I always believe in fortifying who we have. Those are the people we know, and those are the people we want to invest in. Now, if they lack the leadership in this area, or they admit, boy, I wish I knew more. We did a survey, incidentally, last year. We asked how many people would like training in AI. These are technology CIOs. 90% said yes, for me and my staff. So there's a real openness that they would like it. So someone should come in, not for any length of time, but to work with them and kind of figure out where are the best applications, where are the needs, how can we help you? But I can see some really cool partnerships that I can see with our schools of public administration, public affairs. It used to be that even in an MPA program, sometimes you would have 4 credits or sometimes more going to a computer lab once a week. I think we need AI labs. And the word that's being used today is sandboxes. I remember a sandbox when I grew up in Brooklyn. This was still have interesting memories of those, both good and bad. But sandboxes are a way where you have an AI application and you play with it in a safe environment with some kind of facilitated approach. So we need to take those who have a sense of this, what it can do realistically, and allow people to play with it. Our professors should also go to an AI boot camp, because an AI course isn't going to solve the problem, no matter how good. My course, Technology and Public Management, is not going to do it. It serves its own purpose of being a kind of a survey course of all the technology possibilities and the like. We need to figure out how to infuse this in all the various disciplines. And I bet you if we had such an initiative in each of the campuses, kind of a challenge to let people try it. Can you imagine the exercises that could come out with this? So it would be what I'm going to call practical AI. Case in point, I'm designing a course. I do a number of online courses and I'm doing it. And what takes the most time is taking all my documents and figuring out what would make for a good quiz. And I'm getting maybe a little lazy these days, and I'm looking for multiple choice and true or false, but meaningful variations of that. Today, you can take 10, 20 pages of your stuff, load it into a generative AI agent and say, you don't even have to use the word please, but for whatever reason I do, please develop up to 20 questions or more, most of them being multiple choice, some being true or false, based on the information that is attached. That would normally take me a week of thinking, because creativity is not always on demand. This system generated all those questions and more in like less than a minute. Now, I made one mistake in that request. You got to really be good at knowing how to prompt. There's a new art of prompt. How do you ask things? And if you don't get the answer, you ask it again. Luckily, I caught it. What are the answers? Because some of the questions that I didn't know the answers. And said, oh, question 2, the answer is B. So now I know to do that. But every day, I kind of think of different ways by asking. It's like a magic machine. Ask it questions and it will spurn on enormous amounts of creativity. So number one, we have to be curious. We have to be willing to take a little bit of risk and know where our borders are, like no personal identifiable information, not to use stuff verbatim, and to use it to generate outlines, ideas, summaries, summations. And that's just the beginning. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So getting back to local government, Our staffs need to be better trained. Our public managers need to feel more secure about what this can do and what they should be looking out for. And I think that's where my article on guide rails is helpful, because we need to say what you can do and how it can help you, as opposed to all thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Those guardrails are much more appropriate for those who are developing the logarithms that go into the systems in the first place. But at the user level, at the individual level, we should be encouraged.
So when you talk about cross-training staff, or like just introducing them to AI, giving them their own little sandboxes to be able to play in and explore, we also know that staff are already overworked. They have no extra time in their day. Do you know of, I have a couple questions here. Do you know of any grants that from the federal level or state level that government is offering grants for local municipalities to learn more or explore more about AI? And what about private consultants? Do you know if there are private consultants who are willing to go in and work with local governments on identifying ways that AI can be used in their agency?
That's the easier one. Yes, there is a growing cadre of people. There's not millions, but there is a good number of people in the consulting business that can come in there and offer their services. Now, whether it's affordable to a local government is another issue. So maybe there's a way, again, for some state associations or some of the national associations to pool resources and bring somebody in for 2 days, where the scale can be amortized over a number of people coming together as opposed to one-on-one. But are there people? Yes. Are there grants? I think they're just starting to be formulated now. I know there, as I mentioned, there are 3 states that have created AI centers of excellence, varying names, but that's what they are. I believe one of their mandates is to provide resources for experimentation for state and local applications. So I think we're going to probably see more of that.
And so in your time working with local governments and seeing what they're doing, what are some of the more common low-hanging fruit that's easy for them to start, tackling? That's one of the questions from the chat.
Yeah, I think the low-hanging fruit clearly is citizen engagement in a couple of ways. One, augmenting 311 call centers or equivalent. Not everyone can afford a 311 center. They're expensive to maintain. They serve a wonderful purpose, but others have other ways of doing the same kind of thing. Manning, or I like to use the word personing, incoming messaging 24/7 is a luxury to many local governments, but having AI, this can be a real reality. Even if it's a text chatbot, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the text chatbots have gotten far more sophisticated. There are a number of companies that do an amazing job, and many of them already are working in small government. And I'm excited, because it used to be that they were pre-programmed in the way. In other words, there might be 15 most commonly asked questions that they would chat with. And if something went beyond that boundary, it would either say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, and I'll put you in the queue to a human. That's on a weekend, that's not going to help. They have now been trained to really come up with answers and find answers and give a much more reasonable text response, always giving the citizen a chance to opt out. So low-hanging fruit is communicating with citizens. The second area that I think is low-hanging fruit is data analytics, looking at data sets and trying to find a better sense of patterns and trends used for crime prevention, traffic accidents, traffic investigations, looking at criminal records of certain people, medical type of issues that affect public health, public transportation in terms of rethinking routes. I had a friend who, I can't mention the city, he came into the city and he was amazed that nobody ever did an analysis of the bus routes in the last 40 years. Now, one has to assume that commuter patterns have changed over time. Are these the right bus routes? Are they the right stops? Are they operating in the right hours? Because everybody wants people to use more public transportation. So knowing that, which could really be a cost and game changer, people are not using analytical tools to figure that out. So there are many such applications when you think of anything that requires data and anything that requires outbound communication. This is where AI is already playing an interesting role, and it will continue to do so.
So do you know if organizations like Civic Plus or other website designers, they have a plugin that if somebody's looking to file a complaint and instead of scouring the website trying to figure out where I find the form to say that I need this done, that you just type it into the box and it produces the form for you? That would be a low-hanging fruit, but
That would be a
might,
low-hanging fruit. That is correct.
and that would then also have the added additional cost of having to pay for that service.
The question is it a subscription or is it a one-timer? And I think
Okay.
more and more we're finding ourselves in a subscription environment. So yes, there will be an ongoing expense to maintain that system. And that's kind of a cautionary tale here. You might find the absolute low-hanging fruit and say, oh, this is only X amount a month, but you figure out what that's going to cost over time. There is a temptation. I hear this from a lot of tech managers. Oh, we should be developing this in-house. And I'm saying, I'm not sure that's the right strategy either, because that's such a time intensive kind of thing. And government people are terrible at keeping good notes, keeping good documentation of what's there. And suddenly that person leaves like, I don't know how the system works. So you're better off in the long run biting the bullet and saying, this is the service that we need. And this way it can hold that vendor accountable. That would be my preference.
All right, I'm going to read this next question. A key part of our government process improvement has been providing our services in a more equitable and anti-racist way. And because, you know, bad data in, bad data out. There has been reporting and research about the ways AI can perpetuate and even increase racist outcomes. What are ways, processes, policy, practices, governments can balance process improvement with AI and equitable outcomes?
That's an ongoing and ambitious challenge, and it's a problem not in AI. AI in this place is benign and dumb for the most part. It is just reading us, and if we're biased, it could reflect that very easily. And the word I'm also not hearing, which I've started to use, is they also could have prejudice. And somebody's prejudice may not even be recognized outside that individual. Say, I'm not prejudiced, but you know they are. I'm not biased, but they are. You know,
Yeah.
New York City in particular has an interesting document where they had a particular AI policy on hiring in the city of New York. And the reason why they chose hiring is because that would be the one place that bias could really interfere with somebody's career and actually violate the law. So they have a whole system of checks and balances and reviews to make sure that if there's a pool of candidates, that there is a series of questions that could set off alarm bells for humans to intercede. So blind adherence to a program that helps cull the best workers in a particular thing, thinking of employment as an example, should be scrutinized in a human review process, including if an applicant feels that they were discriminated against, they should have the right to appeal to a human. And so humans definitely need to play a role here. They cannot be absolved from the responsibility because, oh, well, this was an AI product. This was that outcome. But there are ways to do it. And it means that the data has to be, I think, curated. The data we have to make sure that the right data sets are being used, because I've seen, I forget exactly where, but there was a case when this group were making decisions. This is pre-AI, but it has implications for AI. And they were building a formula that basically was discriminating against eligible people, but they made a mistake in their formula. So like hundreds of thousands of people who were entitled to federal aid were not getting it because they were eliminated as not being eligible because of a computational error. In this case, it was done by a human. So there needs to be checks and balances. We cannot just say, okay, machines, it's yours. That would be an enormous mistake.
And that would be part of the policy process. So when you're creating these guide rails and guardrails, you need to make sure that there is a critical eye on the data that it's using to be able to produce the results that it's producing, which gets a little bit more difficult when you're using OpenAI, but
yes,
it can be far more refined and made to work for the user better if it's a closed AI system,
yeah.
like the Microsoft Edge and Copilot. Those can be closed systems.
Correct.
All right, so Arun, do you want to go with your last question?
Sure. No, this is very important what you said, Alan, because again, it goes back to how we train our students, right? To bring out policies and to bring out just regulations. There's so much aspects to this. And so again, thank you. I just one question that I had. What are the different, do you see the different variations of AI, right? I mean, we've heard of like narrow AI, general AI. Is there some variations of AI? Um,
Wherever there's an entrepreneur, there's another version of AI. I mean, the irony is that there's only like 5 or 6 systems that have the computing power to do everything that's needed to do, and everybody else is building off of their models to do something special. So I think the new area that intrigues me, something that we haven't mentioned, is what I call the power of intelligent voice. And I have an article coming out next week on that. And that's really the kind of the next frontier. Right now, we're typing to these systems, but step back a moment. Look at Alexa. I've always used as an example. Next time you walk by, say, Alexa, how old are you? I have to be quiet because there's one in the next room and it'll start talking. Alexa's 9 years old. Every Friday, I get a new thing telling me, oh, these are all the new things that you can expect Alexa to do. Alexa's more and more AI powered. And now when I come home and I say something, it says, oh, Alan, hello, and very friendly. Anybody else in my household? Silence. So they know who we are. They know probably whose credit card is paying for them. But the biggest thing that I see is voice. And I think we'll be talking to these devices more and more through conversational AI, which is a new branch that I am very, very intrigued by. And one of the things you may all want to check out, because I'm always looking for new applications, there's a thing called Hume, Hume.ai, and they have a little demo that you can try, and it'll talk to you. And they call it empathetic AI, and it's basically in this conversation you may have, and it could be random. It'll say, how's your day, in a very nice conversational way. But as you're talking to it, it is measuring against 43 variables in terms of friendliness, hostility, withholding information, anger. And if you start reading about what they do, they are there to sell this API to whoever could use this. And I'm thinking this could be used in call centers, could be used in 911 to ascertain those basic questions. What's the nature of the emergency? Where is this? Give me a better sense, all those kind of things. And it's measuring intensity. So they claim to be the first AI model that is based on the basic principles of emotional intelligence. It is not only recognizing our voice, which is like old technology, like only 12 months ago or 24 months ago. It is analyzing our voice, inflection, intent. That's really interesting, also scary.
And so I take it that is the next book. Your book talks about artificial intelligence and state and local government, and the little subtitle is everything you need to know since yesterday. So this is the piece that, and now this is today.
Correct. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be other things, but the fundamental aspects of it are still there.
Okay, excellent. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, and we are up on time, 2 minutes. Alan, we started this conversation and we had a whole list of things that we could talk about. Out of everything that we've talked about so far, what is one thing that you wish we would have focused a little bit more on that you might want to, bring up right now, just to make sure that we have a nice rounded conversation?
I don't know. From my point of view, we covered an awful lot in 1 hour. If there was anything that I would love to have an open mic on, is to talk about rethinking governance in technology, both in academia as well as our MPA students and in local government. I mean, that's the one thing that I have a passion for, because it's one thing to have a technology sitting there with all the possibilities, but we're clearly unprepared in terms of our management, our leadership, our vision. And that to me requires a whole other discussion and a lot of other people to kind of get their ideas and what they see as opportunities and or obstacles.
I'm sure we'll be discussing that in a future webinar somewhere. So, Alan, thank you so much for your time today. Arun, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Alan. That was a really very insightful talk about AI and its implications for state and local government. And thank you, Georgette, for moderating this very interesting conversation. There is so much to learn. Any discussion with AI, we always end with a lot more questions. And here we have some really good questions to take forward. And I will take your suggestion, Georgette. We can have continuous sessions probably every couple of months or even every month to see what is the latest in AI. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for joining us. We will have the recording up shortly, and we hope you will be following us for more trends in AI and how it can impact government performance. So I'll just hand it back to Stephanie. Yes.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Arun. Thank you everyone for joining. I added the link to Alan's book in the chat if anybody would like to order it and read it. And like Arun said, we will be following up with a recording if you'd like to watch it again. And it will be up on Spotify if you'd like to listen to it on your way to work and take some mental notes. And if you have any questions, my email is also in the chat. So feel free to get in touch. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity.